Back to the explainer tonight, that conversation on funding of education. We've heard various complaints from different quarters. There's been a delay in disbursement of CDF bursaries, a delay in disbursement of capitation funds. What does it take to fund the education system in this country? What are the priority areas? Let's have a quick conversation before we carry on with the rest of the news tonight with my guests, Kahi Ndimuli from the Kenya Secondary School Heads Association, Dr. Kilemi Mwiria, who is an education expert and former education assistant minister as well as presidential advisor on education. Amos Kaburu is here, also an education expert. And let's get into this a little bit. So we've heard of these delays. Yeah. Last week we had Treasury saying they have released or are planning to release about 31.34 billion shillings. You have been heading a school. What is the situation on the ground? How bad is it?
Thank you very much, and thank you for us to discuss this. When the capitation delays, it actually disorientates everybody because you move away from what you had planned to do, and you start thinking of how to raise funds. But I want to say I'm happy that the government treasury released some money. And by this afternoon, in some of the banks, like KCB, had already credited some percentage. We are only waiting, principals are waiting to see the circulars to be able to understand what percentage is it and what is the number of students that have been factored into the figures that have been released today.
All right, and we'll come back and talk about the juggling act that you have to play when these funds are delayed. Dr. Mwiria, what does this do? You know, for, like he says, they now have to divert things from, you know, one aspect to another. What effect do you think delays on disbursement such as this has on learning and education?
Well, you know, thank you, Yvonne. And, you know, I'm happy to be here once again and to discuss this very important issue. You know, it's unfortunate, of course, you know, when there are delays, there are problems that the principal here will talk about much better than myself, because there are certain things that can't go on in school, especially if you think about the fact that many of the schools don't have, you know, teachers that are supported by government. The parents have to pay for the teachers, and there are many other needs. But what I don't want to agree with is that, you know, the reason the results have been so bad is because of these delays. There have been delays throughout. Results have been the way we have, you know, gotten used to them over many, many years. It's not a new thing. So I think the question to me is, more importantly, once the funds get there, you know, and both from government and what comes from other sources, how are these resources being used? You know, how are they being used in view of the time they have come in, and what is it that they have to be put in, you know, to be used for you know, immediately? So the use of resources, I think, is much more critical than when they come in. Obviously, we agree that it is better if schools have resources good time, but I think we should look beyond that.
Okay, bigger picture. Do you agree, Amos?
I agree, but I think there's also another disclaimer to make, and thank you for having us. We must really celebrate our principles, I think, because in a way we have normalized managing education through creativity in this country. And that's the most unfortunate part, because once you leave the system to run through innovation and creativity, then you lose grip of it and legitimacy issues begin to arise. But the people who suffer a significant effect are largely small schools, day schools, which are more or less sub-county schools. They're the ones who largely bear the brunt because their funding sources are not diversified compared to extra county schools and national schools where they have multiple sources. And of course, the obvious thing is to inflict pain on parents. We know how they charge left and right the way they feel like. And as it is, it leaves the system largely to innovation, into which prone to abuse the system, and therefore in the long process, even government loses grip of what is happening. So I think there must be a systematic way of really saving the victims who are largely the day schools, who are now bearing the brunt. They have to keep the greatest proportion of our children in school, and yet they are really the ones who are really suffering. If you're going to depend on government to give you 22,000 and parents to pay 12,000 shillings, then obviously when you don't have 67% of your resources, 30% is not sufficient. And we know even fee collection is very, very poor, because most of these children are those who come from poor households.
Okay, interesting. Juggling act, how the monies are used eventually when they arrive, and looking at the bigger picture of just what that means. We will come back and talk a lot more about that, and whether we are funding in the right areas, and what the priority areas should be largely across the different levels of education. I urge you, gentlemen, to stay with me. We have much more to discuss, and we're also looking forward to hearing more from you. The hashtag is The Explainer at Citizen TV Kenya, at Yvonne Okwara. We're getting back to this very important discussion on funding education in this country in just a moment with my three guests.